Okay, 7 o'clock. Welcome to Pub. I've got a short announcement and then before our main speaker of the night, I've got Sam would like to give a little report. You know about supporting Pub. I don't need to tell you that. We've had a lot of activities this month. Tracy and Nate staffed learning tables at Reed and Arleta Elementary, which was great. Photos here. And then upcoming event, don't forget Bee Sting Survivor Night at the Portland Pickles. This is going to be great.
So we'll send out an email. I know none of you have heard about this. This is like a brand new thing. We're announcing it for the first time tonight, and we'll send an email out to the club. It'll have the link. The Pickles every night of their season, the AAA baseball, might even be less than that. They have a theme night, and so they're doing a Bee Sting Survivor Night, and they contacted us. So we'll have a booth there. If any of you want to help staff the booth, we're going to hand out little pollinator seeds and honey sticks. We'll have a observation hive, and we have discounted tickets at a section for Pub. So feel free to share, buy tickets for family and friends, share the link. We have a group of like 200 seats that they're offering to us. So I don't think we're gonna run out. So feel free to share.
And we're throwing out
And we're throwing out the first pitch, yes.
And then you, Brian, you're gonna throw out the ball?
No, this is not me.
Laura.
It's Laura. Laura's doing it. Yeah, we'll be canvassing you with a lot of emails about this. And then Queen Rearing Part 1 on Zoom, that's tomorrow night. And then in person, the 17th, 18th, 27th, 15th, 17th, 18th, and 27th. Pickles, and that's Jana at the apiary. But you have to do the Zoom class first. All this is on the website. Pickles game, and then Fat Bees and Honey Bee Lifespan Don Beck on June 4th. This, I would check the website for the Zoom class. That's prerequisite for the Queen Rearing class in person. Don't forget about the learning apiary. Come on by. Green anchors and see the hives in action. So, Sam, would you like to stand up and give a little presentation?
Hi, I'm Sam. I just recently finished my Eagle Scout project, which I think most of you have heard about, because donated to it. It's very helpful. Without your donation, I don't think I could have finished it. And the Blanchet farm definitely gained some good things from it. A lot of new plants and ability to pollinate with bees. I don't know what the Blanchet house is. I think so. But it's a recovery program for addicts, and I don't know if you just want to go up there, you probably could, but that's kind of it. I don't know, they're in a lot of need for help and support, so it's a good thing to come out there. They have a growing bee program, which is very nice.
So Sam, what'd you do?
Yeah, what is your project?
Oh, I made flower boxes and planted a garden. There's like maybe a quarter of an acre, less than a quarter of an acre.
Quarter of an acre?
Maybe not that much. It was pretty big though.
Oh, boy.
It was a big,
Was it 4 acres?
Yeah, about a tennis court size.
Oh, boy, that is a lot.
Wow.
yeah,
It was all flowered?
yeah. We tilled it and planted it full of seeds and mulch and stuff. So they said it was sprouting. But we'll see what happens.
We'll have photos as the season goes on, but
Yeah.
It looks great.
And where's this at?
The Blanchet farm. It's
Carlton, Oregon.
Carlton.
Oh, Carl?
Carlton.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd just like to come here to thank you all for your donation. Very, very helpful.
Thanks for
Fonta, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, I got
And
my glasses, come on.
Brian, is there a way we could move you a little bit?
You can move to another location.
Okay, I'll move to another.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're in the wrong place, Liz.
The wrong spot. Here, okay, I'm coming. Let's see your dad. And you can see better.
Am I gonna be?
No, I'm gonna
Yeah,
see.
you're fine.
This is
Okay.
good.
You're good?
All right. Well, I am Fonta Molyneaux. For those of you that don't know, I live down in Eugene area in Cottage Grove, and I have a farm on the river out there called Wild Everlasting. It's 30 acres. Our mission statement is 30 acres devoted to exploring the relationship between people, plants, and pollinators. So today I was asked to teach about botany and plants and bee forage, and it was actually such a cool topic because this is a topic that actually was my very first presentation that I ever started sharing publicly. And I ended up being the keynote speaker at the Natural Beekeeping Conference down in Los Angeles. And this was just a small part of that talk that I gave. But it's actually one of the things that brought me into beekeeping. I'm also a master herbalist. I studied herbalism for pretty much the whole first part of my life, from 18 till I was about 35 years old when I started getting into beekeeping. And beekeeping kind of took over my whole life. But to be honest, it really, people always ask me like, how'd you get so good so quick, kind of a vibe. And I really believe it was my connection to plants and being around plants so much that gave me kind of this background knowledge that helped me to advance in my beekeeping. So I was super excited to be here and be asked to share this particular class. And really for me, my main gig now is that I've been teaching beekeeping for about the last 7 years. I have a beekeeping school, Sun Queen School of Apiary Arts, and I teach that out at the farm. I also do private mentoring, and I have students all up and down the I-5 corridor. I was making splits on my way here. I do that. I run about 40 hives. And I have most of them at the farm, but I this year started 2 other apiaries. I have an apiary at the food bank farm in Eugene. We have a new farm there that is all the food is grown for the food bank. And I was the chosen beekeeper to be able to have an apiary there. And I'm really excited about that project. And then I also am mentoring a group of teen beekeepers at an alternative high school that has a farm. And they're like such a group of dreamboats. And I love working with youth in beekeeping because kids are so good and astute at beekeeping. It's really one of those things where a lot of times we tend to, like within farming, when we bring kids into those spaces, we tend to give them like easy jobs that won't turn them off to the idea of farming or whatever. And I think in beekeeping, it's the opposite, where we have these kids come in and they're like super contributing in big ways because their little brains and their good eyes and all that they do really contributes to the field. And so it's been super an exciting thing for me this year to have them and to work with them. I'm also the past president at the Lane County Beekeepers Association for the last 2 years. And this year I became the educational coordinator. So I'm running a really big educational program through the club. And we have a really nice YouTube channel. So I'll try to give you guys the link to that with all of our videos there. And so you can pay attention to kind of some of the presentations that we have, which I believe are very top notch. One of my really big things in beekeeping is that applied practical knowledge. I feel like when I was learning beekeeping, there was a lot of beekeeping tourism in presentations where someone gets up and they just tell you all about what they're doing. And you're like, okay, great, but like, help me, you know, like, and so that was like the difference of what I really want to do is I really try to present from the space of giving you applied knowledge that you can use right away. So we're gonna do that. I think this is a little bit different than generally what happens when people share about beekeeping plants and things like that, forage, they tend to just rattle off plant lists. And I'm gonna approach it from a little different way. And so hopefully you'll get a lot out of this.
I think it's great to start with this very appropriate, both in our bioregion as Chief Seattle, as well as how important this is to beekeeping, because I think there's a lot of things that you can do in farming and different types of nature activities where you're in nature, but you're not quite as aware of all the working parts. And I think that beekeeping puts us firmly into a position where we're observing sort of all these mechanisms coming together. So as beekeepers, we really have a front row, view of all these different things coming together. And I think what it happens is with beekeeping is we kind of learn that we're all downstream from each other and that everything is connected. And we get to see this in action. And I love that in coming to these bee meetings, you'll have people, they're all different political ideologies. And there's these good old boys. And I'm like, I have nothing in common with you, but we're going to talk about the pretty flowers, and I just love that bees are this like great unifier. And I think that this is so extremely important when we're talking about that connection between people, plants, and pollinators. So we are all connected. But we're going to take it way back, all the way to 100 million years ago, when the first flowering plants, the angiosperms, evolved. And this was a huge deal for the land, because prior to that, the land was kind of a monotone. There was all kind of the same plants. There was not individual habitats with different types of plants. The land basically looked the same. And then all of a sudden you have these flowering plants everywhere. And they soon obtained ecological dominance because they were principal providers of nutrients and resources to other organisms. So one of the things they'll do is they'll look at the fossil record and they see that when the flowering plants evolved and they became a thing, all of a sudden all the other creatures evolved too. And so it's kind of neat to look at that. They provided a multi-dimensional structure of support for the entire ecosystem. And the main mechanism that drove that evolution was co-evolutionary partnerships, specifically pollination. And so a lot of times you hear these things with bees, especially now with this whole like save the bees thing that everyone's talking about. You hear these slogans constantly. It's like 1 out of every 3 bites of food came because of the pollination of honeybees. And while that's completely true and valid, I think that is almost a minutia of the real truth, which is they absolutely shaped the entire planet and were the basically purveyors of nature across the ecosystem. And it's a really interesting thing, because one of the things that pollination does, one of the things that pollination does is it solves the quintessential issues that the plants have, which is lack of locomotion, right? And not being able to travel. And so what these bees were able to do is spread the genetic material across the landscape and allow different plants to evolve to create small habitats that could handle all kinds of different environmental issues, weather, and things that were happening around the globe. So they literally created habitat. They literally created biodiversity, which of course is the goal of all nature and life. Some of the ways they did this is through pollination syndromes, which this is one of the most interesting things. There's a bunch of different ones of them, but this is one of the main ones, which is this UV nectar guides. So of course, this is how we see the flower, and this is how the bees see the flower. And they've done a lot of scientific information about this now that we have all these fancy cameras and things. We've learned more about bees in the last 10 years and their relationship to plants than we've known for the last 100 years. And it's mostly because of this technology that allows us to understand these intricate relationships. And I think this one was really interesting. If you look at the peer-reviewed studies on this, what they found is not only are these UV nectar guides present, but there's an aura around the plant that the bees can only see that lets them know when the nectary is filled or not. So essentially, the bee flies along and they can tell based on this kind of energy that's coming from the plant that they can see with only their eyes. Of course, we can't see it. How if the nectary is filled or if a bee had already drank down the nectar from that plant. So it's a very interesting connection that they have with these plants. And it's, of course, one of the main drivers of this incredible expansive evolution that occurred. And I always think this is super interesting. These are the original ancestors, the oldest bee relatives that they ever found. And the original one was Paleovespa fluorescentia. And I always think this is really interesting if you're a botany nerd or plant nerd, or even just like classification and taxonomy. You can learn a lot about plants actually from the Latin name. There's a lot of little hidden clues about the plant's uses, or how the importance culturally of said organism. And what's really interesting with this Paleovespa, which is very old, I have the date hopefully. But I want to say it was like 10,000 years old or something crazy. But basically paleo is the time period, Vespa is wasp, so it's in the wasp family. But fluorescentia, that's the interesting part. Floris meaning flower, Santia meaning saint, saint of the flowers. And I just think that is so beautiful when we're talking about the gift that they gave us as a planet. And just even so much that is literally wrapped up into our DNA and our anatomy and how we are. It shaped who we were as well. So it's a huge deal. Then when I first started doing this, this was the original ancestor that we had, the oldest bee that there was. And everybody's like, oh, they all descended down from wasps, right? But then after I'd been doing this for about 3 or 4 years, at Oregon State was able to find an even older one. And this is actually the original North American honeybee. And there was a honeybee here in North America at one time. It's not the stingless bees. And it was the Melodospex burmiensis. And so it's just kind of neat to see how we're learning even more as we go. And this one predated Paleovespa like 5,000 years or something crazy. So it was like even older. And I'm not giving you perfect time, so don't quote me on any of those because I took that part out because I don't want to be too long-winded on the evolution. But I do think it's super cool that this information is changing and we're learning more as we go. But one of the things that was the biggest gift that they gave us was the speciation and the diversification of the species from that spreading of the genetic material across the landscape and taking one pollen and taking it across the landscape and moving it over here where it could develop individual characteristics to help it thrive and survive in all different climates and the changing habitats. So they literally develop biodiversity. And then, thinking about a keystone species, for those of you that are new to what keystone species, those are organisms that give certain type of structure to the environment. So it's not that all species aren't valid, but some species have more hinging on them than others. And honeybees and pollinators in general are definitely keystone species, and they are life givers to the ecosystem. They enhance habitat. They recycle nutrients and waste. They give pollination, remove genetic weakness through their interacting, and regulate animal populations. This is all stuff, gifts of keystone species as well as our pollinators. And it's kind of interesting to note that the history of humans with pollinators is very ancient. As long as there's been humans, there's been an interaction between people and pollinators. And when you look at this relationship, you can see it's so embedded in our culture and it's so old to the point where a lot of people now really don't understand the fact that honeybees are not kind of wild animals. They are feral domesticated species. So just like you can have a kitten that can live under a bridge and be relatively alive, it doesn't mean that they're living their best life, right? Because if you find a kitten under a bridge, it's probably got parasites, it's probably a little bit hungry, it's not going to be in its ideal condition. And the same is true for our bees. There are feral bees that are out there living in trees, doing their best, but when you really get a look at them, they're usually not in, you can ask a lot of worm catchers this, they'll tell you. Some of the worst bees I've ever gotten have come out of the national forest. I'm just saying, they are often, very much filled with parasites and doing their, not living their best life. And so it's really important to me to kind of point out the fact that these are a domesticated species and they need us. They absolutely need us. And so if you want to be a good beekeeper, that is part of that is interacting with the bees in a level that is showing the fact that we're stewards of them. And I just think it's interesting to note that with all of our technology and understanding of science, we're no less beholden to our place in the web of life and the kinships that support us. So you could be a person who doesn't care anything about bees, pollinators, anything, but your life absolutely depends on it. So I think it's really interesting to just recognize that it's so much deeper than our food culture. It truly is like who we are, and our work that we do here, we're among a select few people on the entire planet that do the work that we're doing here. And it's special and it matters. And so I just like to invite you all into that kinship and that, understanding of how important that is. One of the main proclivities that really just pushes honeybees really out to the front in a lot of ways over other pollinators in terms of how we're using them for food has to do a lot with floral fidelity. And this is the proclivity of bees to visit only one species of flower at a time. And they gather pollen and nectar exclusively until that source is exhausted. And it really benefits pollination because if they were sort of doing this thing, which bumblebees do it a lot, where they go from one plant to the other, they're taking plant pollen from one species to another. Those species aren't going to intermix, right? So there's not going to be complete pollination there. Where a honeybee has the proclivity to keep going to the same flower. And so they're carrying pollen to the same species. It could be a different variety, and that's how you get cross-pollination. But as far as pollination is concerned, you really want them to have that floral fidelity so the right pollen goes to the right species. And that's how pollination occurs. And it's much more efficient for bees when they're foraging. And of course, there's this age-old conversation about whether honeybees, because they are not native to the North America, if they're chasing off the native bees and if they're problematic. And this question has been beat to the ground. There's plenty of peer-reviewed studies where you can see that these bees have very different behaviors and they are not in competition for the same food. A lot of native bees, they are pollen heavy bees in their diet, so they tend to go for the pollen foods. Honeybees are sugar bugs, okay? First and foremost, they want the most sugariest thing that there is. They are not very picky. If it's got the most sugar, that's what they want. And so what ends up happening between the native bees and the honeybees is they tend to focus on their specialties. Now, native bees, because they have evolved alongside these plant communities, they tend to have actually the advantage over the honeybees because they have mouth parts that fit all of these plants. And they have a much wider sort of banquet of options to choose from than the honeybees, who have very short mouth parts. And so they tend to not compete except for they both go into the environment and basically specialize in what they do best. And so actually the presence of more pollinators is a good thing because then there's more complete floral fidelity. And one of the interesting things about the word fidelity is it's also the exactness with which something is replicated. Like when you think of sound, you think of high fidelity, right? You think of it's a high fidelity, it's a crisp sound, it's a full sound, it's more vibrant. The same is true for floral fidelity. When there's more pollinators in the environment, there's more vibrancy in the environment. There's more diversity in the environment. And that's what pollinators do. They bring diversity. It brings a fullness. And this is something that any of you probably have already experienced, where your neighbor who knows you're keeping bees is like, holy crap, my garden has never been so good. Thank you so much. This is something we go through a lot. So I took this little picture. It's the piece de la resistance, the native bee kissing the honeybee, their friends. Okay. Keep that in mind.
There was an article in Willamette Week today. Did you see it?
No.
It was evil. I want you to go. Send in a reply.
I
because
will.
You were talking exactly about what they talked about. Saving that photo.
I will.
Yeah.
And I actually, so I don't know if you guys remember, but not this last conference, but the conference before, the Oregon State Beekeepers conference, we had, what was her name? Deborah.
I can tell you.
Cox.
Yeah.
Somebody Richardson or something. Oh, no, that's Heather Cox. I'm mixing them all up. But you know, it's her name was Deborah Cox something. But anyway, she is one of the ones who did the longest term peer-reviewed study, and it's evidence-based. I pored over that study because I really wanted to know. Yes.
Diana Cox Foster.
Okay, I was close. Diana Cox Foster. Okay, yes. And she is like so incredible. She works for the USDA native bee, forget what they call that. It's like the NARS or something.
Yeah, her study was phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. And if you're somebody, I'm a nerd who loves studies. So I love to pour over these studies and look at all the ways that it was done. It was really well done. It was done over a long period of time in lots of different areas. And it was very conclusive. What she says in that is the only time that they actually are very of an issue is not their fault. It's when they go and they dump a bunch of bees into basically a literal desert of a landscape, and there's like 5 trees and they're all like wanting to get the nectar off those 5 trees. You can't really blame the honeybees. You have to look at the fact that the floral density did not match the population, which is a totally different topic. And even in those studies where they did monitor some of those things, they never saw this thing like, have you seen hummingbirds fight over a hummingbird feeder, right? This is not what bees and native bees do. They don't fight over the nectar sources. So just really kind of interesting.
In that article, I mentioned the mason bees. Are those native bees?
They are native bees. Yeah, with the osmia. Yeah, they're some of my favorite. And again, they don't even compete at all because those bees are on their, they're at the end of their season right now. So they love pollen. They do take a little bit of nectar, but again, their seasons don't match up. They're about ready to go to bed for the year. And the other bees are just getting going. So it's not.
They're really not competing.
No, and again, the diets are very distinctly different. So it's one of those things where people tend to riff on this idea that don't know anything about the subject of bees. And then you have to dig in a little bit and it's kind of like, okay, that doesn't really make sense. But one of the things that I think are so interesting, this is another study in 2015, it was done at the University of Jerusalem. And it was all about bees biasing their forage efforts towards their nutritional deficiencies and fighting disease and parasites. And one of the main kind of take homes that they found in that study was that low floral diversity was shown to lower life expectancy and nutritional vibrancy in bees. So the less diverse the environment is, the less healthy the adult bees end up being and the less long their lifespans are. And I think this is really poignant when we're looking at bee deaths being so high. A lot of those populations are on bees that have been fed a monocrop their whole life. And so it helps us to kind of look at that. There's been a bunch of other studies that have to do with different types of larval nutrition through lack of biodiverse forage. And this is really important to us because when you think about most of the bees that we're acquiring are coming out of the monocrop, a lot of times those bees have been fed nothing but one thing, and then they bring those bees home, and what do? They shake packages, and then they break off nukes, and those are what we're getting. And then they're not really lasting as long. They're not doing as well. And a lot of this is pointing to the fact that when those larvae are only fed one type of pollen or one type of nectar, that is actually the problem. And so I don't want to say that all bees coming out of commercial beekeeping are bad, because I know a lot of really highly integrous beekeepers, just to name a few, Matt Allen from Apricot Apiaries, Jason Rowan from Botanical Apiary, Erica from Humblebee Apiary. These are commercial beekeepers that do an incredible amount of work to make sure that they are producing incredible things for other people. So it's not about the people, it's about the industry as a whole. That's the commentary and that's the critique here. So just something to pay attention, that biodiversity matters. One of the reasons it matters is because diverse natural plant pollens contain plant sterols. And these sterols are necessary for pupating bees to metamorphosize. This is a key life process that indicates the importance of a natural biodiverse diet. And this is really true when we're talking about pollen supplementation. We get a lot of people pushing pollen supplementation. And I will say there is a place for it, but I can't imagine a friggin' place in Oregon that needs it. I'm just saying, we have the opposite issue. We have pollen pluggers. I can't tell you how many pollen frames I'm pulling out all year long in the spring because they just over pollen here. I mean, look on any pollen map of the US and you'll see a big red dot over the Willamette Valley and they're just like, you got hay fever, don't go there. We just have a lot of pollen here and it just never seems to be an issue. But one of the main things that we learn about this is that plant pollen is completely different than pollen supplementation. And it is the key ingredient here are these sterols that are in the natural plant pollens that allow the bees to metamorphosize. And this is one of the reasons it's such a big thing in the diet of the brood. So when you actually look at it, and this comes from a study that was done by Dr. Priya Chakrabarti, who was one of the main people at the OSU Bee Lab. I think she's coming back, maybe.
He's at WSU now.
Okay, WSU, yeah, okay, that's right. I knew she came back to the West Coast. So, and Ramesh Sagili, they did a really great study. They're still in this. It's about to be fully rolled out, all the information from it. But what they were able to do is come in on this plant sterol that was a naturally occurring in pollen. And the more diverse these plant sterols are, the healthier the bees are. So again, another, trick for biodiversity. And one of these, some of this natural in the nectar, we have iridoid glycosides. And these have secondary metabolites called aucubin and catapult. And these are found actually in any plants that are considered deer resistant. When you hear this is a deer resistant plant, it tends to mean that it has this particular substance in it. And these aucubin and catapult, they have shown to have medicinal qualities which decrease parasites. And it just is another reason that bees need access to diverse forage so that they can alter their forage and get these specialty plant pollens that help them to heal themselves of all kinds of diseases and issues in the brood nest. So great, we know all that's true, but like, where does the, rubber meet the road here? And that's really important to me in any kind of teaching is that I give you guys practical strategies for developing this. This is my farm. This is when we very first came to the farm. We now have about 300 fruit trees in this area. But the first thing we had to do is you always got to start at the roots to get the fruits, right? So developing soil health, that's a really big part of this. And a lot of people don't see where the soil meets the pollination, but it's absolutely a big part of this. And soil health is huge. We did a lot of working with biochar, and we had a kiln we worked on. We created tons of biochar. We tilled that in, and then we laid cover crop. This is crimson clover. And this was probably, I want to say my second or third year getting into beekeeping. And I had 13 swarms show up that year, that was all out there. And we always joke that it was like every bee in town was just like, because I live very remotely, I'm 17 miles from the closest store, and I'm 3 miles from my closest neighbor. And we just joke that like every hungry feral bee was just like, you know what, I would like to be in a wooden box if I can be by this banquet. So it just goes to show if you build it, they will come. But we actually got a really cool honor. We are the flagship farm for the Oregon Bee Project. We carried out a year-long study with OSU Extension and the Oregon Bee Project. We were able to document all kinds of pollinators. 2 had never been found and we're still waiting to get a chance to name them. But we were able to enter 2 of our bees were entered into the record in Salem. They keep a record of like new improvements that were found in Oregon for the year, and we were entered into the record for that. And we've done a lot of education around this. We love the Oregon Bee Project. I think it's one of the umbrella organizations that has the potential to kind of fix lots of problems at once. So I definitely recommend getting involved if you can. But what are kind of some of those principles that we do? So the first thing is we have a strict adherence to organic practices. My husband actually works as one of the directors of the Oregon Tilth Company that inspects farms to be organic. He's been doing that for about 20 years. And so when I first got into beekeeping, I was treatment free. I know, gasp. But actually it was really in a very beautiful evolution of sort of learning through that, because of course, as an organic farmer, you get into beekeeping, it's like, of course I'm gonna do it all organic, you know, but you don't really understand the issues are not the same in this. And so I had a really interesting learning curve of just kind of coming into really learning about the bees. I had 3 really good years where I didn't lose almost anything, and I made tons of splits, and I had this huge apiary that was like out of control. And then I started catching swarms in town and bringing all the bugs home, literally. And then all of a sudden I just had drones sharing, you know, mites everywhere. And in 1 year I lost all of my bees, all of them. So luckily I had another apiary down the road, and I was able to get like 3 or 4 that were saved. And then I made lots of splits, and so I rebounded. But I mean, hell yeah. Actually, Miss Mandy Shaw helped me out. She was my new beekeeping friend at the time, and she felt so bad for me. I drove all the way up here, and she broke me off a nuke. We went out to one of her farms at the time. She broke me off a nuke, and I took that nuke home, and then I blended her nuke with my nuke and did a bunch of queen rearing and made a bunch more queens to rebound that. And then of course I started using treatments, and I do only use the organic treatments. So formic acid and oxalic acid is my belief. They're really good. They work well. But as far as the farm and the plants go, we're totally organic. We also plant for floral fidelity. And so this is kind of interesting because I've given you this whole like quantification on diversity, but then I'm talking about floral fidelity, which says plant all the same thing, right? Because they like to go to the same flower over and over again. So this is what's unique about planting. You can see this with the zinnias all in one row. This is actually goes a lot to the traditional ecological knowledge. And I was raised with Native communities in my life since I was a child. And I watched how they worked the land, and I've watched how permaculture works the land. We do something that we call chop and drop. That's where you take the plant, you basically prune it down, and then you mulch underneath that plant with its own material. And the idea is it takes what it needs, right? All those materials and nutrients that specific plant needs, and you mulch it and you give it back to the plant, right? Well, the other thing that they do that's really important is they want to keep all the same thing in one spot, because it's really not effective to go harvest elderberry here and then walk another 5 acres and then harvest elderberry there. So if you actually can look, there's not a piece of land that hasn't been groomed by native hands. And you can still go and find these old plantations essentially of like elderberries, and they're short and stunted because humans have trimmed them down like that forever to harvest and make ease of harvesting. So sometimes what happens, I think, in our modern society is we forget to count ourselves in to this process. We're so vested in doing what's right for bees and doing what's right for plants that we forget that humans are part of that. And so that's what I talk about when I talk about the kinship between people, plants, and pollinators, is we have to figure ourselves in. And part of the reason is we are creatures of convenience. We're only going to take care of the things that are easy and we want to take care of. We have to be in relationship. And you know how that is. You plant something way over far where you can't see it, and then it's like out of sight, out of mind, it never gets water, and then you walk by it like 3 weeks later and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot to water you, you're dead now. And that's why, is because when it's available to us, we will tend it. When we're in relationship and we want something from it, we'll attend it. So counting ourselves in, and with that, with floral fidelity, we can have lots of diversity, but still plant the single species. So a lot of times people will tell me about these pollinator mixes. I am not a fan of pollinator mixes because, for one, here you are, you're jumbling up all these different species that aren't really related to each other. They don't have the same bloom times. They don't have the same needs. And then you throw them out into the ground and you're like, good luck, you know? And then like 1 or 2 things comes up, but none of the other plants that are in the list come up. Well, one of the things too is that's not helpful to the bees because it's not all organized. So what I like to do is plant for floral fidelity. So we will basically take, even if it's a small yard, if you can plant, 3 or 5 things of one single species in a row and keep it in the same area, you're doing a lot to help them with the efficiency. And there's been a lot of, and there's a conclusive study that's coming out about this topic, about planting things in rows of all one species and how much more efficiency and how much more nectar they can uptake if you plant this way. So in modern planting, we often learn, like in landscaping, you hear that spills, thrills, and fills, right? That's how we plant. We want to have this thing spilling over. We want the, and that's all aesthetic. But I would like you to think about maybe changing your aesthetic so that you have one species in any given area. The other reason is harvesting. It's just so much easier. You can harvest that from one area, focus on that, mulch it back down, and you're much more likely to continue to tend that if you do so. The other thing is, of course, selecting mutually beneficial species. And this is not hard when it comes to honeybees. Like I said, we have, thousands of years of evolution alongside these creatures. And because they are so important to not only our food culture, but our environment, we have consistently evolved mutually beneficial needs. So we share pretty much every plant that is important to us is a very important bee plant. So often people ask me to rattle off plant lists for them. And I'm just like, well, is it good for you? What do you like? Like, do you like fruit? Okay, cool. Do you like medicinal herbs? Cool. Do you like cover crops that make it so you don't have to weed as much? Great. So things that people want are naturally the exact things the bees want because we have shared needs. And that's what's so interesting about keystone creatures and evolutionary co-partnerships is that we develop similar needs, right? So we have that. So we always try to find things that are mutually beneficial for people, plants, and pollinators. And people love our garden tours because we walk around and every plant has a reason. Everybody's like, wow, there's not a single plant here that doesn't have like a reason why it's here. And it's like, yeah, because that's what we select. Okay, talked ahead of my couple things there. The other thing is succession planting and harvesting. And this goes along with the floral fidelity is having things that have different bloom times. So if you're going to plant out one crop, it's nice to plant once a week for 3 weeks in a row so that you have those bloom times that are scattered. So those are really great. The other thing is habitat for ground nesting bees. So whatever we're doing, we're always thinking about all the pollinators. It's not just our honeybees, it's the pollinator load, as I like to call it. All the pollinator creatures, right? It's the hummingbird moths, it's the wasps, it's the, all the things are going to be eating your food. So when you're thinking about that, we're kind of thinking about that habitat that they need to thrive. And I'm always looking for hollow plants. Zinnias are a great one. There's lots of things. And if you chop those stems, you leave them down, you will definitely get lots of nesting bees. So those are really great to have. And then leaving wild buffers, thinking about that, like areas that are uncultivated. And sometimes it's like, I love those memes that were just like, everything, it's because of the bees. It's like my messy yard, I'm leaving it for the bees, it's like, lean into that, y'all. Like, it's just like, if it's messy, it's a little undisturbed, it's wild, you're doing it for the bees. Don't worry about it. But they really do need those undisturbed areas, the leaf scatter and composted areas, things like that. Access to water is a big one. In an environment like an urban area, I think it becomes even more of an issue because that whole like bees in the hot tub thing is really real. And you can really piss off your neighbors if they're over there in their hot tub all the time. One of the reasons they like a hot tub is bees can only drink water that is above 55 degrees, right? Because they can't fly in under 55 degrees. So if they go to a river and they just drink cold water, you'll see they'll get stunted and they can't move like a snake that gets too cold, right? So bees like warm water. And so that's one of the things that you can do is by having water around in small little pans and things like that that can get warmed up by the sun, you'll keep them in your yard rather than going to the neighbors. So those are really good kind of hints.
Fonta? I heard once about they don't really go low to get water, that you should keep your water source higher than lower, is that correct?
I don't think that's true just because I
Okay.
do have water on the ground, but what is true that's a little break off of that is they have a, what we call the poop path. That's the distance that bees fly out and poop. And they will not drink water or take anything in that is right in that area where they fly out to poop. So you don't actually want your water source right by the hives. You want to move it to a different area. That being said, wherever you put that water area, they will create a beeline to it. And so don't do what I did, which is put it right by where we park. And so every day you get out of your car and there would be like bees flying in your head to get to the water. So you don't think about it when you do something like that, but they will consistently choose the path and distance from the hive to the water source. So make it sure that you like where it is and it's not going to be in people traffic. But yeah, they don't like it right by the, like, they will not touch water that's like right in front of the hives at all. So yeah, move it away. And I don't know, I mean, there could be things I don't know, you know, so I always keep that open. I always joke that I'm a master herbalist and I feel pretty good that I know how to do all the things in herbalism. I don't know about every plant, but I definitely can find out, and I know a lot about how to make everything, all that, but I could never claim that about beekeeping because the body of knowledge in beekeeping is so vast. It's like, I don't know, I just don't think anyone could ever be a master. And as soon as they start talking like they are or acting like they know it all, I just run from those people because like there's just too much to know. And then again, biodiversity above all. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed at my farm is by having lots of different types of nectar producing plants, that creating that biodiversity, that my bees are very healthy. And I just noticed that. I just have that. I mean, I actually went through one of the worst things ever last year. I had European foul brood really bad. And the way I got it was we had an ice storm and it was knocking down trees everywhere. And our club was going around rescuing these tree bees. And I brought a bunch of those tree bees back to the house and there was honey and stuff that was in them. And so the bees all open fed that honey that I didn't really want. I was lazy about it. Let me be honest. I just left it out where they could get it. And I really shouldn't have done that. And I'd never had it. And in fact, people described it to me before and I'd be like, never seen that, sounds fishy. You know, like I kind of thought it was the beekeepers' problem. And then I actually experienced for myself and it was devastating. And so it's just kind of one of those things where unless you experience it, you don't really know. And I had to work meticulously. Like everybody told me, you're going to lose everything. Like this is what happens. Like people will lose 500 hives from this kind of, to the degree that I had it. And I had to like painstakingly go to every hive and cull out all the drones because the drones were sharing it between all the hives. And I mean, not only did I save my apiary, but I came out of winter and I only lost one hive. And it was because I let them keep all their honey and I culled out all the drones and stopped it in its tracks. But also because they had so much biodiverse forage that they could heal themselves with. I really think, and I have not seen a single sign of it this year, not a single sign. And it usually pops up in the spring. So I feel pretty good that I've given them a lot of bouquet. And, you know, to be honest, I live in the country and people always think like, oh, well, you live in the country, it's easy for you. But truth be told, there's so much more biodiversity in the city. I run bees in the city and I run bees in the country, and the bees in the city consistently do better because of that year-round biodiverse forage. So don't sell yourself short here on this urban beekeeping. But this is one of my greatest tools. I know I've shared this with y'all before. This is my beekeeping wheel of the year. This is the way that I keep track of and I learn more about the different pollinator plants in my area. This is a cross-cultural tool that's been used all over the world since the beginning of time to teach about agriculture. And it has a lot to do with our calendar. And it helps us to kind of be aware of things as they occur. So in the Northern Hemisphere, all beekeeping begins at spring equinox in March 21st, and it ends at fall equinox. That's only half the year. Everything we do in beekeeping, that's like literally the only time we can even open our hives. That's a very short amount of time compared to lots of other places that have much longer season. And of that season, it's divided in two parts. You have the increase and the decrease. The increase is marked by the yellow fields, and is featuring brood building up, they're replenishing stores, and they're drawing wax. That's some of the main features. And of course, our favorite, swarming. Swarming is what is happening. And all that occurs in the increase. Then at about summer solstice, that's when the peak of the nectar flow happens, and that coincides with the blackberry flow. And the blackberry flow is the #1 kind of baseline forage plant of all of the Pacific Northwest. I don't care where you live, the background of all that you have is that blackberry flow. So it really does a big deal for all of us in terms of aligning with summer solstice and representing the peak of the nectar flow. It also shows us that we're going into the second part of the year, which is the decrease. And the decrease phase, the opposite is true. And so this is one of the things in beekeeping that gets people really mixed up, is all of the sort of information and advice that you get in the first part of the year, the opposite is true in the second part of the year. So this is where it gets kind of confusing, because people are like, but people told me to add another box when 7 of the 10 frames had bees on the top. Well, yes, that's true in the increase part of the season, but if you add an empty box with naked frames on it in the decrease part of the season, they're not going to do nothing with it. It's just going to sit empty because they are not in that phase anymore, right? Because even though there's plenty of nectar present, they're already planning for winter. And so we as beekeepers have to really communicate with them during this time. And one of the ways that we do is, for one, we have to pull our supers off in enough time so that they have the available nectar for the end of the season just for their own top brood box. So my opinion is, don't leave supers on top of our brood boxes. So you choose your preferred configuration. My favorites are either 2 deeps or 3 mediums. And then that is the area, the total area that they stay with year round. And only the boxes on top are for catching honey, and they only go temporarily on during honey season. And so for us, and I don't know exactly the time for you, but by the first week of August, we need to be pulling our honey supers. And part of the reason isn't because there's no more nectar, it's because that rest of that nectar is for them to put in that top brood box. Because what's happening is that nest got really big and it grew in the increase, and then at summer solstice it stayed static, and it stays static for 2-3 weeks, and then little by little, as the brood hatches in the top box, the queen starts laying down in the bottom, and they backfill the top box with honey. And by the end of the season, by fall equinox, the way your box should look is a big brood nest in the bottom and a whole entire box full of honey in the top. And that will happen if you pull your super in time. If you don't pull your super in time, they assume they're getting all that honey on the top. And you come in and you wait and you start pulling your supers in September, that is not enough time for them to get the remaining nectar and get it where it needs to go in the brood nest. So this is how people starve their bees out, is they pull their supers too late. There's not enough nectar. They try to catch up by feeding sugar water, and the bees cannot, what do they call that? Where they cannot convert the sugar water quick enough to make it truly stored, capped, and ready for themselves in that tiny short amount of time. So it's really important that you pull your supers off in time so that the bees have the available nectar that's left in the environment for that top box. But it's also a tool for keeping track of the flowering plants. And if you want to learn a lot about your bees and your area and what you have available to you, what I like to tell people to do is take this calendar, and I can send you guys a link for it if you don't already have one. And I like to blow it up. This is a chalkboard that is ginormous. It's like 10 feet big. It's on my wall. And this is our tool that we use. And so each month I have a different pie section for each month. And I record in it the high, low temperature, and average temperature. And then I make a list of all the plants that are flowering within 3 miles of my farm, which is as the bee flies. Now, this is not like, people are like, how do you do it? I'm like, well, it's not like it's keyed out and I've got like an encyclopedia and I'm writing them all down. It's like literally just like, I'm riding my bike and I'm seeing this plant, ooh, picture. Oh, I'm driving my car. Oh, cool, there's that's blooming. You know, you're taking pictures, you're doing your best. This is a mindfulness practice for you to learn. It's not like you're gonna get every damn plant in 3 miles. It's that you're gonna get a good idea of the types of food opportunities that they have in your area. This is mind-blowing information because I'll tell you what, I have clients where it's like they do everything right and their bees just don't do well. And then they start doing this and they don't got shit for their bees to eat. That's why they're literally starving their bees. It's not a rich spot. So it's like, you've got to know your area. Your bees can only do as well as their environment that they're in, right? So what we can do is start to keep an idea of what things are blooming. Then once you get about a year done in this, you can, as a gardener, go back and be like, you know, there's not really much happening in July. Why don't we plant something that blooms in July? Or why don't I do a succession planting so that I lay out my cover crops so that they're going to bloom in that July when there's not as much available. And believe me, using this tool, I get so much more honey for the amount of hives I have than most of my counterparts. And it's because of this, because I'm able to produce year-round forage for the most part. I mean, I have stuff that blooms like the boxwoods, a lot of the bushes, ivy, it blooms in January. And you all know, we get these great January days, they're above 55, those bees are flying and they actually have nectar. Or like on the coast, I teach at the coast a lot, in Tillamook up there, they've got the Japanese knotweed. That stuff is like blooming like the dickens all in the winter, and those bees are like gangbusters going after that stuff. So just to be aware of what you have and being able to sort of work with that, this is how we reciprocate to our bees, because it's not just about what we can get for them. I hate that style of beekeeping where people just, all they care about is what kind of honey they can get, what they can get from their bees. It's like, is that how you look at things in life? I also care about the species. What can I give to them? And this is where we meet that. This is where we show that we are a keystone species, that we are bee people, and we actually can interact and collaborate with our bees for an even better situation than what they could have in nature, right? That's kind of the thing. It's like when you do gardening, you don't like be like, I'm gonna plant my tomatoes out in the forest and let nature do its thing. I'll be back in 2 months to get my tomatoes. It's like, no, you'd come back and there wouldn't be shit. The deers would eat it all, right? Like, that's not how we do like agriculture. Yet for some reason with bees, people just think throw them in a wooden box and come back and get that honey. And they don't care. They really don't care. And I see this in natural circles. I see it in regular circles. It really doesn't matter what your style of beekeeping is. It's kind of a character thing. And for me, it's like, I'm not in it to just take, I'm in it to give and collaborate. And it's all about that human honeybee connection. So here's another version of it. This is what I would give you. And you can copy this and blow it up, but these are the kind of information you can do. You can also coincide your plants with your manipulations. So I'll write like when I got my first swarm, I'll write when I reverse brood boxes, when I remove my insulation. I make these notes, and I have about probably, I want to say, I think it's 6 years of these wheels that I can go back and look on, and it's so fascinating to compare and contrast them over the years. And you know what's really cool is now they have the Google tool where you can go back and see all the weather for the past and different things like that. You can actually go back and like compare your weather just from using the Google Earth. I believe it's a Google Earth tool. So you can learn, do a lot with, you know, interacting with your, you know, weather apps and things like that with this. But it really brings you in. I feel like, especially when we talk about learning from the land, and we have a lot of like movements right now. There's the rewilding movement, and they're like, we're gonna be wild again. You know, all the different things people think, and they're always kind of like looking for some guru to come in and be like, we're gonna tell you how to be more earth loving people. And I'm always like, well, cool, but like, where'd you learn it? You know, like, I don't know. This is like, for me, this is like really practical way to learn from the earth and the land as your teacher. It's like, I don't really believe that beekeeping is anything more than an observational science. And to be to be doing observational science, it requires a closer look, not just sort of a passing glance. So this is a really great tool for taking your observations deeper and really learning from the land, like what does the land have to teach you? And I think you'll learn a lot if you make these. So that's just one of my techniques, but I use it with my students and it really makes a big difference. So what does that look like at Wild Everlasting Farm? This is a pictorial essay of what a year looks like in plants for us. Of course, it's not all of them, but here's kind of the main players. And these are all pictures from my farm. So if you know it, call it out.
Helen.
Yep. Yep. Purple dead nettle.
Again, great.
No. You know this one? This is a good one to know in Oregon. This is osoberry and Lonicera. It's one of the very first nectar producing shrubs that blooms in Oregon. The bumblebees really like it. Osoberry. Lonicera.
Cherry.
Cherry. Cherry. No? Working great. You know what's funny about this one is it was a tiny little bush and we have 30 acres and up in the forested part, there's all kinds of Oregon grape that was growing under the canopy and was all stunted and short. And I just dug them up and brought them out into the sun and they turned into this huge shrub and hedge. And it is so cool. I love to watch the bumblebees on it.
Maple?
Yes. Now this is the big one. And I'm just gonna say there's no better honey than maple honey, straight up. And when you get a big maple bloom like this is usually what tells us that it's gonna be a really big swarm season. So when you look down in Southern Oregon, they're looking at ceanothus. So you know the ceanothus, the deer brush, the blue shrubby stuff. When that blooms, they're like, oh, we're gonna have they don't have as many maples like us, right? But anything from like Eugene or Cottage Grove, probably up north here, it's the maples. And the maples, when they bloom, it's like all balls to the walls for all the bees. They're just like, okay.
Orange? Chocolate.
Acelia. This is one of my favorites to grow. The blooms just last for like 2 months and has tons of nectar. Lacey Facilia. Lacey Facilia. It's used as a lot as a cover crop, but it can just be blown. There's a whole line of it. It's all, and see the fruit trees, it's grown as like an understory cover crop. And it really keeps the weeds down. You can like, if you have trees or whatever, and they get really weedy, you lay down the Facilia and it outcompetes all the weeds. So it keeps it really nice and unweeded without having to do all the work. Clover, crimson clover. And on the way up here, there's just fields of it. So it's been so good. And then it makes a really beautiful fuchsia pollen that they bring in. And then when you have lots of good plants, you get these incredible swarms. Look at this one. This one made its own weather. I don't know if it'll load quickly, but. And that poor little tree ended up snapping in the middle of it because it was just like the giving tree. Every swarm wanted to land on it. But this one was like, it got so big. Look.
Oh, wow.
And I get these and these are not from my hives. These are wild swarms that are coming, feral swarms from the hill all around my house. So these are not coming out of my hives. But they just see the banquet and they're like, sorry, it's not loading very good. My daughter, and she's little. She's 17 now. So. That's a swarm. She's a good swarm catcher. You only protect what you love, so get them young and let them feel that love. I don't have the volume, but it's cute. We had a swarm come when she had a little friend over. There's our medicine wheel. You can see that round garden in the back. It's a circular garden, just like my little thing. And each spoke of the wheel is a different species of plants so that the bees have that floral fidelity. It's also a teaching garden so that I can show people what blooms when. That's buckwheat and radish, I believe. Did you know that California poppies come in pink? A lot of people don't know that. You guys know these ones? Yep, larkspur. And then what's this one? Bee balm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they love their cone flowers. This is marshmallow root. This is one of my favorite bee plants. You guys know this one? This is, no,
Salvia?
no, anise hyssop. And they call this is like one of the best honey plants they have. They've done a lot of studies on different bee plants, and this one refills its nectar every 3 seconds.
Wow.
So here's my video of this. Hopefully it'll load good. See.
But how many plants do you have to have of this to make it enough?
I think not, it doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, some people just even do container planting. You know, anything is better than nothing. So I think it matters, you know, just even a little bit. But this was, this is on that same plant, and this is the kind of energy you see. This reminds me of, for those of you that know what it's like to have a breastfed baby, and they're just like on the boob and they're milk drunk. Look at this. That's how much the nectar is literally pouring into that bee's mouth, and it's got its little foot up, like.
That's a great video.
It just reminds me so much of those little breastfed babies. They're like, here's my foot.
So what kind of bee is it? It's awfully dark.
Oh, it's a honeybee.
I
Yeah.
realize that, but what variety do you think it is?
You know, I'm a big proponent of mixed genes. I have a lot of muskies, and I have a lot of dark queens because I caught some of my original bees came out of the forest behind my house, and I think they were kind of a mutt bee based on all the. It was a big place back in the pioneer days. There was like 10,000 people that lived there. Now there's like 300 people that live there. So I think all their bees escaped and made these little muskies, and they
It's
tend to
Cottage Grove?
yeah, Cottage Grove. I live in Dorena is the town I live in. So it's like east of Cottage Grove on the river. This is borage. And another one that has a great source of both pollen and nectar, and the blooms last forever. So you really can't go wrong with borage. In fact, yeah, it's true. It's saved me though in a clutch where different weather has been bad and they haven't had access to good nectar. And then borage is just like, I'm still here, don't worry. And I'm like, thank God. Because not everything else is. This is a really good one. Does anyone know this one? No. I love to get them on this one. It's a trick question.
Is it a thistle?
It is a thistle, and it's related to artichoke. Does anyone know the cousin? Cardoon. Cardoon. And the thing about cardoon is, for one, it's like way bigger. This thing gets to be 10 feet tall. It's got twice as many thistle or artichokes. They're not edible at the top. They actually cut the bottom, and the Italians make some like really interesting food with like the almost like a fennel bulb kind of a vibe with this. We've never cooked with it. I just grew up for the bees, but I kid you not. Let me see if I have. Yeah, look, it looks like when they're blooming, it's like a bucket of nectar got thrown on the ground. They just go nuts. They go absolutely nuts, and they ignore everything else when this is blooming. So I think it's a good one, and it's a perennial, so it just keeps doing its thing, and it doesn't need any care. Yeah, it likes it, but I actually have one in the shade. It gets a little shorter than the others, but it does fine. It's kind of one of those like plants that can kind of like Jerusalem artichoke, where they just like can't really kill them if you tried.
And they sell them at Garden Fever in Northeast.
Ooh,
Those are
good to
nice.
know.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Thank you.
I actually have learned bees don't have the easiest time getting nectar from dahlias. I think the bumblebees do better with the dahlias. But I will say that dahlias bloom in a time that there's not a lot else happening at that end of the summer, you know, and so they tend to get pollen and things from them. And I found that they do actually like them, even though it's not maybe ideal.
Certain varieties of them.
Is that what it is? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
there's ones that are open that look almost like a daisy.
Oh, okay, maybe that's
Yeah.
what it is, and I just didn't realize that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that more. That's interesting.
The Dahlia Fest.
Oh, yeah. So
Tons
pretty.
of different.
I gotta check that out.
Let's leave time for questions.
Okay, and the last few, we've got, this one is one of my favorites, Sedum Autumn Joy. It blooms in the autumn, and it's another really easy to care for plant. It's also one of those beer resistant plants. So got really good stuff going on there. And then, of course, goldenrod. And we don't really have a big goldenrod thing here, but in Eastern Oregon, they have a huge goldenrod thing in the fall, and they get tons of nectar from that. And it's a really good fall thing.
What about Joe family?
Oh, I love that. I've never seen it grow really well where I live. I don't know if it's too moist and it likes it drier. I'm not sure. I've had it grow, but not like,
I bought 2 plants last year because I was dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were all over it.
Did they?
Yeah.
Oh, and they do love it. I know.
Yeah.
I just haven't been able to get them to grow good, but I might try again and see. And then this is also really interesting is that when the fruit drops, they'll take the juice from the fruits and they love fruit juice. And then it all turns into yummy honey and pollen. So the last few little things, I'll go quick because I know you guys want questions. Is just sort of the reasons why focusing, like I'm not a plant nerd. I am a plant nerd. I'm not a plant snob in the sense that I know a lot of people are just like only natives, blah, blah, blah. I don't do that. But I will say there are some really good reasons to lean into natives. And that's one of the things is that they do really well when weather is crazy because they're so adapted to the area. They also have a lot of help with the microbes in the soil. They feed the soil. They conserve water, so they don't need as many resources as our cultivars. And they support the nutritional needs of the native wildlife. And then something that people don't often talk about is that they're significant to the cultural landscape, right? Because we live in Cascadia and wouldn't be Cascadia if it wasn't the trees and the meadow foam and the things that we've come to know Cascadia for in our bioregion. These are important plants to us because they represent our area. And some of my favorite Pacific Northwest, so this is a good thing to get pictures of. These are my favorite bee plants that are native.
Will you send us this PowerPoint?
Sure, yeah.
We upload on the.
Sorry.
I've
got you.
Thank you.
And on
I'm
the
so sorry. I
website,
wasn't
we'll
quite
have
as
a couple
fast
days
as I
on
thought.
the
That's okay.
her presentation.
Thank you, Fonta.
Yep. Also thinking about the native trees that contribute to propolis, and mostly in our area, it's the poplars and the cottonwoods. That's why it smells like cottonwood. And then also being aware of the fact that naturalized invasive species often make up the backbone of the nectar profile of a given area. So we often are like, we hate these weeds and, you know, it's true, but like ultimately they are also contributing in what ways they can, and they do feed our bees. And then thinking about cover cropping, because cover cropping is a really great way to regenerate soil, fix nitrogen, suppress weeds, and they simultaneously are providing nectar and pollen. One of the things that I've learned that's a really great thing to do with this is when you plant your cover crops, you can succession plant, which plant them on different dates, like a week apart. The other thing you can do is when about 3/4 of the cover crop has bloomed and are starting to fade those blooms, you can set your mower deck on high and mow them and get a second flush out of them. So this is one thing that I do a lot. I never let a cover crop just bloom once. I always mow it and try to get a second flush out of it. A lot of these cover crops too will do really well with producing a second flush in the fall. So if you get them planted at the right time, you can often just naturally get 2 flushes out of them one of the ones I like a lot is the sweet clover. It's a, I think it's a biennial actually, and it produces, it's like taller and it produces all kinds of little arms and legs off of it. And it has flowers that just last and last and last. So really kind of looking into this. The other thing to think about is the flavor. Now, for me, I hate buckwheat honey. No disrespect to anyone who loves it, but I hate it. And I don't want my honey to taste like buckwheat. So even though that being said, buckwheat only takes 25 days from seed to flower. So if you've had a bad nectar year or you're looking to feed some bees, you can do a lot with buckwheat. My only thing is I don't want my honey to taste like it. So I usually will harvest all my supers off and then immediately I throw down buckwheat seed and I let it bloom for them, for their honey, right? Because who cares if they have it for them, they like it, but I don't want that flavor in my honey that I'm harvesting. So you can mess with your flavor profiles as well. Okay.
No, I'm.
And then native, and then this is our last one, is the bee-centered medicinal herbs. And I really have to say, I think that this medicinal herbs kind of represent the pinnacle of the human honeybee connection, because so many of these herbs are absolutely nutritive for us. They're very nutrient dense foods in terms of making teas, all this stuff, but these are prime foods for bees. So when you plant these things, you're going to get more nectar per square foot than about any other type of plant that you could produce. And also, the more you interact with medicinal herbs, the more they'll bloom. So medicinal herbs like to be pruned because they're meant to be used by humans, right? So you go in there, you give it a nice haircut, you make a bunch of tea with that, you're going to get a second bloom. So the more you interact with these flowers, the more blooms and the better for bees it's going to be. So these are kind of a win-win when it comes to sort of meeting that mutually beneficial species. It's always going to be the medicinal herbs, and you can grow them in small areas. You don't need huge areas. They love, and they're all often purple flowers, and bees have an affinity for purple flowers. So I always like to point that out. And then the last slide is fruit trees. And something to think about when we're talking about fruit trees is, one, when they bloom, of course, you have the most forage per square foot, and that's just true. But they often require cross-pollination. So having different varieties of the same species in a given area, this is a really beneficial for fruit set. So if you want big fruits, you got to have that cross-pollination. But something to think about is if you really get into your fruit trees, it's the heritage fruits that have the most impact on pollinator health. And that's because they have longer bloom times. A lot of the more cultivar type hybridized trees tend to bloom all at the same time as everything else in nature, which the heritage trees tend to bloom a little bit later or a little bit earlier. And so we end up getting a little bit more forage for our buck with these heritage trees. And there's a lot of us that are really into the heritage species. So if you're not aware of this, there's all kinds of us who collect scionwood. We use rootstock and we graft. That's something that my husband and I are really interested in. We've collected hundreds of different heritage fruits from all over the Pacific Northwest. And I think beekeepers need to get more into this because traditionally the orchardists and the beekeepers were the same, right? It's the people who carried the orchards definitely held the bees down. And so that's something that we can bring that heritage back to our beekeeping. And for me, it's also about food security and sharing biodiversity. Like, what fun is it if my farm just has all these cool species and nobody else does? Like, that's not cool. And to me, it's about creating accessibility for food and nutrition and sharing it. So this is the Agrarian Sharing Network. This is something that we've been part of for quite a few years, and we collect scionwood from all different diverse heritage trees. We give those away for free, invite the entire community. We do seed swaps, and it's just really a part of what we should be doing in this. And as beekeepers, we know why. And I think it's a great thing for us to do as beekeepers and share that. And I want to dedicate this to the next 7 generations because ultimately, like, all of this is really related to what our future is going to be. And we're doing this now as stewards of this knowledge that we are going to have to pass on. And like everybody knows, you cannot have a good garden without succession. So when we think about what we're learning and what we're doing here with the bees, we're thinking about ourselves and what we're experiencing, but also what we do now is going to impact all future generations. And so we're so lucky to have that position, and also just to remember that that's part of the work that we're doing. And this was my first swarm. It made a little heart. And there's my further reading. This is one of my favorite botany books. It's a pattern method of plant identification. It's when I first started going to herbal school. This is how I learned my botany and my I love it because you learn about the different plant families, and you can literally go anywhere and identify plants if you don't even know them, because it's a lot easier to remember the, you know, couple hundred plant families there are versus the millions of different species there are. So you can, once you learn the plant families, you can identify all the cousins and stuff of a given family, no matter where you are in the world. So it's a really cool thing. Grading Sweetgrass, if you don't know, is an incredible book that blends scientific knowledge, the teachings of the plants, and indigenous traditional ecological wisdom. I've sat with Robin a couple different times and learned a lot from her, and it really definitely is involved with all of my beekeeping and all my plant knowledge. And if you want to know more about my work, wildeverlasting.com. Thank you.
Fonta, I want to thank you. Every time I come in here, you bring just so much emotion out with how we are caretakers of this earth. And I so appreciate it.
No, thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you. I appreciate your.
So what is a heritage tree? What would be an example?
You know, there's a lot of them, but it's
Okay.
just different varieties of different apples. I'm like, of course, now I can't even think of a single one, but you know, it's just different types of apples that are older varieties versus the newer hybridized cultivars. There's so many different kinds of ones, like, and I will say that's not my total forte. That's definitely my husband's kind of bag on that. But there was a man in Roseburg named Nick Botner. He passed away recently. He was the pretty much #1 apple collector in the entire country, and he preserved over 800 species of apples on his farm in Roseburg. And so my husband and some of the other people in Agrarian Sharing Network went to his farm for 5 years and collected every single species of signwood to replicate that collection beyond just what he had, because he had passed away. And these have been disseminated all throughout. And there's stuff from England that came over when, you know, the first pioneers were coming here. They brought those plants along with them. And so there's a lot of those heritage trees. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on giving you names, but they're out there.
Well, I'm wondering, like the Gravenstein, Northern Spy, Wayne.
Gravenstein, I think, is one. And there's just a bunch of them, but there's some that just do better in the Pacific Northwest. And so that's one of the things that is really good to do is get them. And you guys have actually the great nursery here. Is it Portland Nursery that does all the apples? Yeah, and that's one of the best places to get apples, actually. And they know so much about everything there. Like, we love going there and learning, and they have their apple fest and you can try all the weird varieties and stuff. And we both were raised my husband and I in the Bay Area in Northern California. And so my husband was really interested in a lot of the apples that were grown around the San Francisco Bay Area. And there's one that we love that we've grown for years, and it's called Pink Pearl. And we actually named our daughter, her name is Isla Pearl, her middle name is Pearl. We named her after this apple because when I was pregnant, I was just like addicted to them. And but you bite into the thing and it turns red inside. So they have blushing apples, and there's just so many different kinds. And if you look back, in each apple style has a history of, you know, these orchardists who were like, we're gonna keep this apple alive, and they brought it from different places. And I don't know, it's just really special, that stuff, that side of things. Yeah. Anybody else?
About this is my 3rd year, I'm still figuring out my brood nest.
Yeah,
configuration,
for
and it's
sure.
just like, don't feel like I figured this out yet.
Right, yeah, and people don't often give you the right recipe for that, they don't tell you, and you're like, "Mm."
Yeah, and so if you're saying keep the same configured or boxes throughout the year.
Right,
And if you're doing 2 deeps, then do you turn one of those deeps into into a super? Or do you put a super on top of that and then take that?
yeah, okay, so essentially, think about it like this, when everybody talks about a brood configuration, essentially what they're referring to is the nest where the queen
Right.
lays, okay? So those boxes stay on year round, no matter what, and what that happens is and you add your supers to the top, right? Now, when it's time for supers all come off by August 1st, they still might have brood going on in that top brood box, but as soon as those supers come off, then as the capped brood hatches in the top box, they start backfilling it with honey, because right, there is no super, there's nowhere to put it but the top of the brood nest, which is what you want, because the reason why is that whole brood nest shrinks down to the bottom box. Then, I mean, and this happens very early on. And it's literally like on the first cold nights, they abandon that bottom box almost immediately, and they hang on the bottom of the honey. And so the whole cluster is going to hang on that bottom of the top box, right? Throughout the winter, that cluster moves up and eats all the honey as they go. And when you open the box in spring, at spring equinox, what you'll find is the entire cluster is in the top box and the bottom box is completely abandoned. Now, if for some reason they're not like that, maybe it's because they still have honey, maybe they've been thrifty and resourceful with their honey and they haven't eaten it all, that's a good thing, you know? But also it can be because it's simply like you didn't leave enough for them up there, you know, in which case that's why people will add a super to the top. However, people often think they're giving their bees help by leaving a super on top, but actually it ends up being that if you leave a super on top, they're still going to shrink that brood nest. But because all the honey is up on top, instead of them shrinking down to the bottom box, they take the brood nest and they shrink up to the honey. So they won't, like the bottom box is empty, they end up going into winter with just the super. The super is only 40 to 60 pounds. A full deep is 80 pounds. So you think you've given them more because they have 3 boxes on, but that 3 boxes doesn't matter if there's nothing in them, you know, so it's really not doing them any favors by leaving the super on top. The only time I would leave a super on top is if I totally effed up and didn't let them have enough honey in that top box. And in that case, I'd put the super on top and pull the bottom box, because no reason leaving a bunch of empty gear on. And you guys have heard me talk before about this. I'm not a fan of people leaving extra gear on. Even this time of year, when we're talking about swarming, people are so afraid of swarming. They'll take their nuke and they'll add all this room to them. And there's no way a nuke can keep all that, you know, thriving and good and everything, because there's just not enough vibrancy in the cluster yet. So you want to kind of give them incremental space.
The hive that survived, like, went real small, I
Oh,
opened it, it was
dwindled.
like this big, and so, but the top box was full of honey. So I
Yeah,
pulled that just so they have less to have to defend, and now they're the size, they're like 6 or 7 frames, they're totally like coming back, but.
that's good that you did that, because that's actually the #1 thing. And don't add the honey back, because yeah, just give them the space on top. Because honey, again, is only winter food or rainy day food. They do not want honey, and they cannot brood up on honey in the summer. So that's what always happens with beekeepers, like, especially just to give them a little credit, is the natural beekeepers. They're like, oh, we only feed our bees honey, and they like take all the honey and like give it to them this time of year. It's like, they do not want your honey. Like, they don't want it. Like, you could put a honey frame out. Like, I actually did just do this. I put a honey frame out for open feeding that had been previously frozen because I needed room in my freezer. They have not touched that frame. And it's just because there's so much nectar. They don't want that honey unless that's winter food. That's like, you're not going to eat canned food when there's fruit falling off the tree. You know what I mean? It's like the same kind of theory. So, but yeah, just one of the best things to do is if you have a hive that dwindles like that, reducing down their space sometimes is the way to help them, is the remedy, because that helps them to focus on their life processes and they can bounce back. So that's the first thing I do when I see a hive is dwindled, is I reduce their space. And sometimes that's enough to help them bounce back.
Yeah.
Mhm. But don't be afraid to feed sugar water either, because sugar water is a tool and it helps you build up faster. Believe me, I've been through it all. When I was first learning, I was like, I'm never gonna give them sugar water, blah, blah, blah. And then I just realized, like, yeah, you cannot give them sugar water and they may even survive, but they're not gonna thrive. And when you give bees sugar water early in the season to help them rebound and recoup, then when you cut it off, they are just off and going. Where if you just make them skim by with just what nature can provide, that's exactly what you're gonna get out of it. So my thing is, let's keep them fed, let's keep them vibrant. You know, it's like if you have a goat, you're not gonna be like, just have what you have. You don't get nothing else in a dry lotted area. It's like, okay, well, after about a month, they've eaten all the grass, right? So you wanna give them the best that you can so that they can thrive.
Okay, questions over.
Questions over?
Nothing from the Zoom, no questions from these folks, so
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
thank you.